My name is Jim Morse. I'm the Disaster Response Coordinator for the Kentucky Annual Conference. And this is the first session of our video group called Connecting Neighbors, about introducing and planning for disaster ministry. These video sessions are not meant to take the place of in-person meetings and discussion, but rather to give you a basic foundation in which we can make those discussions much more effective in preparing individuals for disaster, churches for disaster, and determining what our disaster ministry and witness will be if disaster hits our communities. I'm starting this session with background information about the theology, if you will, and the tradition of disaster ministry in the United Methodist Church. Now, if we were to be like Paul, it would be okay to foolishly risk ourselves to spread the gospel. Foolishly, at least in the eyes of the world. But we should not risk ourselves, our children, our frail ones, our church property, to predictable dangers if there's anything that we can do to mitigate, lessen, or prevent that exposure. If we believe that we are called to make ourselves and our lives available to God in service, this is one of the best services that we can provide. God gives us many gifts and blessings every day, and we are called to be good stewards of those gifts. And the most valuable gifts that God gives us are our families, both personal and church families. Now, we as United Methodists, we understand in a most foundational way that our mission is to be a transformation agent in the world around us, to make disciples for the Lord Jesus Christ. And if we are to be followers of Christ who earnestly seek to live our faith and share our faith in ways that can transform communities and the lives of those of our neighbors around us, doing so in time of disaster is one of the best and most effective ways of being able to do it. This takes some planning and preparation and consideration on just how we're going to go about this. The first and one of the most critical ways of doing this is to build competent local strength. Local strength meaning the local church family. We need to attract, train, and manage our volunteers in a more efficient manner. We need to be preparing our families, our church, and our communities to be better prepared for disaster. Because it's not if disaster is going to strike. It's going to be a situation of when. And we need to be true to our collective mission to make disciples and to share the gospel. Preparing and sharing the gospel starts with faith. And our work in disaster ministry is based on our faith in God, His promises to us, not only to protect us, but to strengthen us in our efforts, and to respect and honor the communities where we serve. This mission inspires us to doing what we do in disaster ministry. And our values provide the guidance of how we do what we do. The values that we hold foremost in disaster ministry is to try to see people as God sees them, worthy of love and honored as partners in this ministry. The United Methodist Disaster Ministry has specific values that we measure our actions by every day. The first is to provide practical, proactive support to the most vulnerable survivors of either natural or man-made disasters. We work very hard to honor cultural differences. We believe very strongly that all people have God-given dignity and worth. We work with local, state, and national partners. We do everything we can to be good stewards of the donated resources, whether they are financial, materials, or volunteer time. We do not tie the promise of our efforts to any religious or political viewpoint. We do our best to incorporate the best practices and standards to provide innovative and effective and integrated ministry. And we welcome prayers, gifts, and service of individuals and our churches. Now, we don't do this alone. The United Methodist Ministry on Relief, UMCOR, is part of a national association called VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters, and have been for many years. It is in this association that we coordinate our efforts, both locally, on a conference or state level, and nationally. And it is also here where we develop points of consensus, where various denominations, various faiths, various service groups can come together and agree on how we do certain things. Things like providing emotional and spiritual care, case management, how we repair and rebuild, how we coordinate our volunteers. And all these points of consensus are consistent with the United Methodist mission and values. This mission is one where we really need to stay focused on what the mission is: to help people, to respect their faith, their culture, and their values, to work cooperatively and not judgmentally, to be the positive presence of God's love for all, to act with humility, justice, and peace, and to remember who we are and whose we are. We're there to provide the presence of Christ in disaster. We are His, and we are Methodist. We are supported by our connectional system. And as you look at this image, you will see that the local church is right in the center of it. And throughout these discussions, you will hear me say more than once that every disaster starts locally, every disaster ends locally. Now, the local church is not by themselves. If you look, it's surrounded by the district, and the church is in the district. And the district is surrounded by the conference, and the conference is surrounded and supported by the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction is supported by the general conference. But I'm going to come back to my initial point. Every disaster starts locally. It ends locally. But the local church is not alone. UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, they are our partners. And I always get the question, well, who is UMCOR? And I answer with this question: are you United Methodist? And if I'm in a Methodist church, I really hope to get the answer yes. Well, then I say, you're UMCOR. And UMCOR really exemplifies the previous slide that you saw of our connection that starts local and goes all the way to the General Conference. And through UMCOR, they provide training, they provide expertise, they provide relief supplies, they provide funding. And I want to speak on funding for UMCOR for just a second here. UMCOR's funding, especially for administrative costs, are all second mile giving. That means they do not get any money from apportionments or from the general church in the general budget. It's all extra giving. UMCOR Sunday, which used to be called the Great Hour of Sharing, provides the administrative support monies so that when there is a disaster and you give to the advance for that disaster, 100% of what you give goes to that disaster. It does not go to overhead cost. Very few charitable organizations can make that claim. So when UMCOR Sunday comes along in March, keep that in mind, and I encourage you to please be generous in that regard. Now, Thomas Kemper, the General Secretary for the General Board of Global Ministries, said, "Our mission is to show Jesus Christ to the world. And let us pray that our structures do the same." And the connectional structure of the United Methodist Church is a strength, but it is also a challenge. The effectiveness of that structure is dependent upon healthy relationships between people who are generous with their lives, compassion, time, talent, and resources, both in our church and our communities. Developing and maintaining and improving these relationships is one of the most important goals that we have in these workshops. To encourage you to talk not only among yourselves, among other Methodist churches, but other faith-based groups in your community and service groups in your community, so that our disaster response will be the best that it possibly can. Now let's talk a little bit about the phases of disaster for a second, probably longer than a second. Our church has a role in all the phases of disaster, and we need to understand those so that we can be more effective in each of those phases. And there are 5 phases. We call them the 5 R's: readiness, rescue, relief, recovery, and review. And let's take a look at each of these phases. We should always be in the readiness phase. That's where we are right now, hopefully, where we are promoting awareness. We are planning. We're communicating. We're training. And we're practicing. And we need to do all of these activities to minimize damage when a disaster occurs. You can have the best plan in the world, but if it's sitting on a shelf in the pastor's office or in the administrative office of your church, gathering dust, not being updated, not being trained on, not being exercised, it's going to do you very little good in a disaster. We need to be prepared on a personal, church, and community level. And we need to be prepared in that order. Now, rescue is the phase immediately after the disaster strikes. This is when the public safety first responders, the utilities, and emergency management are going to be working actively to protect property, lives, and further damage. This is not a safe time for volunteers to come in and try to work, but it is going to be a time when neighbors are going to be helping neighbors. This is a time when the local church will be working very strenuously, I hope, to have a proactive involvement in these efforts. And some of the things that they can be doing in this situation is providing shelter, either as a shelter in association with the Red Cross or as a congregational point where people in a damaged community can come and get shelter temporarily until they can go to a Red Cross shelter or return to their homes. It could be a situation where the church is providing resources to care for the first responders, allow them to rest, eat, have a place to recover and breathe out. The relief phase immediately follows and often overlaps the rescue phase. This is a situation where first responders and utilities may still be working in the area, but the local officials have deemed it safe for residents to return to their residences and for volunteers to be able to come in and start helping. Let me stress that they need to be trained volunteers. Early response team members and others are allowed to help mitigate the damage and work to prevent further damage. They will be doing activities such as tarping, mucking out, that's cleaning up and drying out water-damaged homes, and removing debris. Local churches during the relief phase may open their doors to provide a caring presence and a place of sanctuary, again by possibly temporary housing, food or meals, distributing donated supplies, maybe providing child care or pet care, providing good, correct information to their community. They may become work areas for volunteer management teams, or they may assist in assessing the damage. The relief portion and phase of a disaster is a chaotic time. There are lots of needs, lots of people wanting to help, some of them trained, some of them untrained. Lots of people wanting to donate, sometimes appropriate things, sometimes not. And there will be lots of people with lots of different ideas on what needs to be done. Planning is very critical for this phase of the disaster. You need to develop the appropriate relationships with other agencies and other faith-based groups before the disaster occurs. You need to establish among yourselves functions and roles for administration, operation, and communication. You need, before the disaster occurs, to start developing resources to accomplish what you decide your mission and ministry is going to be. And during the planning period, you need to establish proper boundaries and scope of work. Often untrained but well-meaning volunteers will come and they don't realize that their actions may cause more harm than good for the survivor that they are trying to help. Plan ahead. Minimize that possibility. Now, recovery follows relief. And again, it may overlap. This is not a linear situation, but a very fluid situation on the phases of disaster, where relief is very fast-paced, very broad in scale, providing temporary fixes, band-aids, if you will, and you're trying to help as many survivors as possible. Recovery is a deliberate, client-based, detailed, intentional, and long-term process. Recovery focuses on the needs of individuals or individual families. Recovery may require collaborative resources of several different faith-based groups, service groups, businesses, outside assistance to meet the unmet needs of these survivors. It is, again, I say, a long-term process. Recovery may last months or even years. Now, after recovery comes review. And actually, review may be part of the closing of each of the previous phases. But generally, the most important review is when the new normal has been established in the community. And it is critical to sit down and document what went well and why it went well. And it is also critical to sit down and document what didn't work and why didn't it work. And then you start that planning process again. How can we make it better? Where can we go? Now, in the recovery function, again, I said this wasn't linear, so I'm going to regress a little bit and focus again back on recovery. We look at the functions and the resources that are needed. And as you scan down through this slide, we often think of resources either as money or material goods. But really, there's a lot more that goes into it. Now, financial resources allow for flexibility. It allows to purchase what is needed on behalf of the survivor. It gives us the opportunity to support local business whenever we can and help the community as a whole to recover. But financial resources need to be managed very closely. They need to be accounted for. They need to be distributed equitably. And people need to know how their giving has been working. Now, donated materials may include construction supplies, appliances, household goods, infant, child, and adult hygiene and care supplies. Let me stress at this one point that donated goods, unless specifically asked for, should not include clothing. That is one of the major things that gets donated and is also one of our largest problems in disasters, is managing donated clothing. It is much better for the survivor to have money to be able to replace what they actually need. Volunteer labor is often the only way many of the survivors can actually rebuild and repair. But not just that. Volunteers are needed to manage materials and goods, to administer programs, to answer phones, to gather information, to give information, provide logistical support, and to coordinate and host volunteers. In disaster recovery, we need construction specialists who are skilled at estimating the cost of repairs and determining appropriate use of volunteer labor. Emotional and spiritual caregivers provide a calm and comforting presence when survivors are most in need of a safe place to express their thoughts, their feelings, and experiences. Disaster case managers partner with the survivors to verify recovery needs and help them to develop their own plans for recovery and help them access resources to make that recovery a reality. Now, all of these are necessary functions and must be coordinated to function effectively. And I'm going to stress again, long-term recovery may go on for months, even years, until that disaster area returns to a new normal. No organization or group in a neighborhood is in a better position than the church to understand the community and to assist with the development of a community-based recovery. But it takes planning. It takes communicating before the disaster. Be proactive, not reactive. One of the most important things that we do in disaster ministry, either as individuals or as a church, is to provide the visible and tangible presence of the body of Christ. Our churches provide that. It also provides an opportunity for our members to grow in faith and discipleship and putting their faith into action when they have a viable disaster ministry. Now, understanding our calling, our connections, our context, this gives us a foundation on which we can better prepare for and respond to disasters as the people of the United Methodist Church. Now that we have our foundation and context of why we do this ministry, let's talk about how the church can be most effective and how church members can be most effective. And that starts when the individual church members are prepared, ready, and resilient themselves. We've all been on an airplane, or if we haven't been on an airplane, we've seen the video where the flight attendant will get up pre-flight and they're standing there and they're going, the exits are there, there, and there, and this is how you walk and lights will come on, and if the little yellow mask falls down, you put your own mask on first. Well, in disaster ministry, we need to put our mask on first. If we are unprepared ourselves, then we cannot effectively minister to others. However, if we are prepared, if we know that we've done everything that we can and our family is safe and our ducks are in a row, then our witness and our ministry to others will be much, much more effective. We start by preparing ourselves and our family for disaster. And it's a relatively simple process, but it's often overlooked. We, like so many people, say, well, it's not going to happen here, or if it happens, I've got in my mind, we'll be ready to go. But if an official were to come and knock on your door and say, sir, ma'am, you've got 10 minutes to evacuate your house, and we don't know if you're going to be able to come back in a day or week or ever. What do you take with you? Where is it? Have you thought about that? We've seen examples in California with the fast-moving brush fires, where sometimes people didn't have 10 minutes. They had 5 or 6 minutes to get out. And when they came back, their houses were gone and everything in them. So where are your important papers, your photographs? What do you need to take with you? We need to have an emergency kit close to one of our exit doors or in the garage or already in the car, someplace where we can grab it quickly. That will help us survive 3 to 5 days on our own. That will have copies of important papers that we need, such as insurance information, copies of mortgages or deeds, birth certificates. Very important things that you will need in trying to get additional help that you may not have if you don't already have them gathered together. Let's take a couple of minutes and watch this video on putting together a pack that can be used in a disaster situation. This is provided by the American Red Cross.
Hi, my name is Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm a very proud Red Cross volunteer here today to talk about emergencies. Because emergencies happen every day, and you need to do more than cross your fingers to be prepared for them. So we're going to talk today about how do you build an emergency kit, what needs to be in it, where to get it, how to do it. Stick with me, get a pen and paper. 1 gallon per person per day is what is suggested. Food that isn't refrigerated. Protein bars, great. Breakfast bars and canned food, particularly canned food that has a pop top so you don't need a can opener. Easy to keep, flashlight, and batteries. Small scrapes, some bigger injuries. You want to have a good first aid kit to take care of your family. Hand sanitizer, bleach, really important for purifying water, and disinfecting wipes. Medicine, make sure that you have a 7-day supply for any person who's taking medicine. A radio, really important to stay informed during an emergency. Have copies of important documents, birth certificates, passports, insurance policies in your kit. See? It's easy to be ready. These are some of the items in an emergency kit. To get a full list, visit redcross.org/do-more.
Okay, so thanks to Jamie Lee Curtis, we have an idea of what we need in our go bag. So let me ask you a couple of other questions. Do you have a fire escape plan for your home? Do you have fire drills to see if it works? Do you have working smoke or carbon monoxide detectors? Have you thought about multiple ways out of your home? Do you have a common meeting area outside your home that all the family members know that in a fire situation and they evacuate the house, this is where they go to make sure that everybody is out and that there's no question? Do you have a weather plan for your home? Have you identified the safest locations in your home in case of severe weather or a tornado? Do you have alternative shelter options if you live in a modular or mobile home? Do you clearly understand, and does your family understand the difference between a watch and a warning? And do you have emergency supplies if your home is damaged? Another important thing to consider in your family plan is, do you have a communications plan that if disaster hits while Mom and Dad are at work, kids are at school, and whoever else is in the house is out doing something in a different location, do you have a primary and secondary meeting point if you can't communicate, if the phones are down and the cell phone towers are down? Do you have an out-of-town number memorized as a touch point? Many times in a disaster, local communications may be overwhelmed, but long-distance communications may still work. Do you have a general understanding of what may and may not work in a disaster, communication-wise? When voice calls on a cellular system may not go through, there's a really good chance that a text message may. No guarantee, but it's something to try in understanding. Does your community have plans to set up for amateur radio operators? If you don't know, ask your emergency manager, see what may be available to you. Do you have a current inventory of your home and your belongings? If you do, when was the last time was it updated? There are several apps, and some may even be supplied by your insurance company, that makes this real easy to do and real easy to maintain. So planning. What do we need to plan for? I have another short video for you that talks about the planning process and touches on some of the points that I've just mentioned. Please watch closely.
Want to be prepared for an emergency? Here are 3 easy steps to ensure you and your family are ready in the event of a disaster. Step 1. Put together an emergency supply kit with essential food, water, flashlight and radio, first aid and medical items, and copies of important documents. A supply of water and non-perishable food items is essential, so prepare a 3-day supply in case of an evacuation, or a 2-week supply if you are confined to your home during an emergency, including 1 gallon of water per person per day. Be sure to gather flashlights and extra batteries, and some extra cash to include in your emergency kit. Step 2. Talk to your family to develop a disaster preparedness plan. Have a couple of designated meeting places in case your family members get separated. It's wise to have one meeting spot right outside of your home and one outside of your neighborhood in the case of an evacuation. Decide on an emergency contact who lives outside of your area and make sure everyone in your family has their phone number. Develop an evacuation plan and practice it with your family twice a year. Don't forget to include your pets in the plan. Practice following multiple routes to safety or sheltering in place in safe spaces in your home. Once you're safe, remember to contact other family members through email, text, phone, or social media to let them know you're okay. You can also work with your local Red Cross to list yourself as safe and well. Step 3. Be informed. Learn what you need to know to keep your family safe. Know what kinds of disasters and emergencies are likely to occur in your area and monitor the news if a watch or warning is issued. At least one family member should possess knowledge of first aid and CPR. Share your emergency knowledge with friends and family and encourage others to be prepared too. For more information and a full list of survival kit items, visit redcross.org/prepare.
Now, as we have planned for our own family, what can we do as a church family to help each other be prepared? And I'm going to give you some ideas to consider. Consider an annual focus on individual and family preparedness in your church. Now, September is National Preparedness Month. That would be a good month to hold this type of emphasis. October is Fire Safety Month, another good month to hold this service. Outreach efforts with community agencies to promote smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and weather radios and their installation and programming is another option that you might consider. Maybe a safety fair. In Fire Prevention Month, invite the local fire department to your church. Invite them to a potluck after morning worship on a Sunday and make a deal out of it. Get to know them. Invite the local police, the local EMS. Get to know them. Let them get to know you. Pick their brains for how can we be better prepared. All three agencies have public relations groups that are more than willing to help provide you information in that regard. You may want to consider some type of ministry to help individuals acquire the necessary supplies that they need. May try to do a fair on meals ready to eat. Who knows? Use your imagination there. Assist people in signing up for weather and other warnings that they can receive either by their cell phone or by their dial-up phone at home or other methods. The foundation for an effective disaster ministry starts with us as individuals. I urge you, become a foundation stone in your church's disaster ministry by being as prepared as you can be.